Good. It's a couple minutes after the hour. I'm just going to get started right away. So I'm going to share some ideas with you today about growing stronger context providers. In other words, growing leaders and that will be able to own the future with you and then get everybody who they're reporting to them help you and try to really move forward faster. And that's really the key these days because if you're not creating the future fast, someone else is creating it before you. So I'm going to share some ideas with you just for maybe 15, 20 minutes. I'll open it up for questions afterwards. But as people who know me, I've very much focused on ownership over the years, and I found that ownership is important now in terms of we need to get people to feel it's theirs. But it's a very uncertain, complex world. So if we don't frame the context right, we don't focus people in the right way to quote create that future faster. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some ideas around this. I'm going to share a couple of frameworks here to kind of explain context and why it's so important, and also what's required in leaders to be able to make the changes to provide a stronger context for their people. Okay, and I'm going to give you five key things to remember. And at the end of the session here, I'm going to email out this one pager for you so you have that as a reference. But I add this into everything I do these days because it's very, very critical. And think about this. Think about AI. What you get back from AI is content. What you type into AI is context. So, the context you frame determines what you're going to get back. And the context you frame for your people and reinforce, it really drives what they focus on, the choices they make, and end up what they're going to achieve. So it's really important for us to frame and reinforce the right context in all our communications and our conversations with our people. Now, let's talk about what context is. Context for me is more why and where, right? Why and where we're going and why we need to get there. And a lot of times it's associated with a vision. And the best definition of a vision I ever heard is from Andy Stanley in the States. He said, a vision is a mental picture of what could be, fueled by the conviction of what should be. What are the possibilities, and why should it be us that we're going to go make that happen? So, in many ways, a vision to be powerful for your people, it has to feel personal. If it doesn't feel personal, I'm not linked to it. It's on the wall, it's in a PowerPoint, whatever. It's really not going to drive me to really take a lot of action. We were much more motivated, and from emotion than we are intellectually getting it. So I think it's really important for us as leaders to create that direction. A famous motivational speaker in the States said it long, long time ago. You cannot hit a target you do not have. Your people can't strive for something that's not clear to them, it's not personal to them, etc. So we really need to be focusing people, and that's by providing that context. And one thing to think about here about context too, and the key point, I'll give you five to remember. The first one here is make it personal. And personal, I found the very best leaders, when they're framing the direction of where we're going and everything, they have the ability to frame the direction in different mile markers out. In other words, some of your best people can see far down the road as to what you want to accomplish. But some of your younger, inexperienced people, but maybe very good, can only see the first 400 meters and so forth. So, what I found with leaders is they're telling stories, they're giving examples, they're always sharing the vision or the direction or where we're going, the context, in different ways for people to take it on. Your best people can see way down the road of what you're trying to accomplish, others only see at different points. So, what I found with very good leaders is they explain this context in, quote, different mile markers down the road. So they find ways for people to personally engage with it. Okay. Now, there's one other thing that's really, for me, it's very much connected to context, and that's really framing what your people focus on, and that's your expectations. You know, where we're going, and then what is it you want them to achieve based on where we're going. And particularly those mile markers or milestones are so important in that way. And it's really framed at, let's how we go and create the future faster. Today's world, we're so busy and everything, we delegate things and so forth, but we don't explain what good looks like from our perspective as a leader. And then we get back something later on that's not necessarily what we really wanted, and we don't really appreciate it as much. So I found one of the things that's really important when you sort of frame what people focus on and how they're going to deliver it and achieve it for you is provide that context, why and where, but also invest the time to make your expectations clear up front, right? And so they have a target they can hit. So the second point here is, we need our people to deliver the expectation to our expectations, but they have to be clear. And the key word here is they have to be understood. So I think if you think about what we need to do and constantly frame and reinforce, it's both this why and where, the direction, the context of where we're going, and what is it we want our people to achieve in those steps, the expectation, and particularly what good looks like or excellence and so forth. And I think, there's a lot of discussion about Steve Jobs in the past about what he did. They thought he was a micromanager. I think he was really micro on his expectations in terms of the look, the feel, what he wanted people to really, appreciate when they buy an Apple product. So expectations are key. And I think establishing what good looks like is very, very important. So context, more why and where, but also aligned with that is our expectations about what we want people to achieve along the way. And remember that comment I made before, because it's very key, is we have to explain the vision and the direction in mile markers out that allow our people to personally connect to it. Okay. Now, one of the things I wanted to share with you about context is how does it really work into leadership? And I like to use sort of the levels of influence to illustrate this, okay? Because, if we're going to be very effective leaders, we want to be influencing at higher levels where we get a bigger impact for the time. Now, think about this. Your lowest level of influence is how, right? If you're telling your people how all the time, you tell them, they do, they come back. What's the next how? This is the micromanagement level. And, micromanagement has a speed limit because you're operating more to your head capacity to tell everybody what to do. You're not using their heads. And it's very interesting. I've done a number of workshops over the years, about 15 in total, on letting go. And I asked all the leaders, these leaders of companies around the table, list up all the reasons why you don't let go. And 80 to 90% had nothing to do with the quality of their people. It had to do with their own thinking, insecurities, what they need to feel in control, what they like to do, et cetera, et cetera. So what we need to do as leaders, especially if we want to be able to be a better context providers, we have to move away from micromanagement. We need to go more to the outcome level or the what level, right? If we can make it very clear our expectations of what an outcome looks like, we can delegate more of that how along the way. And also, for us as leaders, we have to be able to feel in control with less information and trust people versus knowing everything. Because if the key to success was knowing everything, the librarians would be the most successful people in the world. But that's not the key. So we're trying to enable our people with doing things, and that's more at the what level than it is at the how level. A very interesting phrase you'll see in leaders who operate at what level is how they ask for meetings. In other words, they don't say, we need a meeting to discuss, which is an activity. They say, we need a meeting to agree or align on. And they're framing the outcomes of the meeting and creating the context for the meeting up front so we're much more effective and focused. I taught this to a company, and the company president made a principle. He said, if you're invited to a meeting that doesn't have an outcome, you have my permission not to attend. So as leaders, we need to get away from the micromanagement level. How? We need to get at least to the what level. But if we're going to really climb and be much more powerful context provider, we have to get to the who level. And now, people who know me know that the Dr. Seuss saying, if you don't have a who, the who is always you. So if you don't have someone you can delegate to, someone you can give this, it's always your responsibility. And you need a who that has the ability not just to do the activities, but to also achieve the outcomes more on their own as well. And in a minute, I'll share what you need this who to have the ability to do too as well. So it's about investing in your who. And I think the most powerful leaders, especially have the ones that have the time and focus to frame more stronger outcomes and context around that, is they're much focused on thinking who before how, right? And sometimes you think about this yourself too. If you call the right who and just have a quick 5-minute conversation, it can save you 5 hours. So I think we have to get away as from leaders as always thinking we need to have all the answers and we need to tell everyone what to do, but we need to think about who are the right people and keep growing our who to be able to take on more and more. One of the most important things I used to always ask myself when I started leading a new organization is three things. What does my team, where are we heading, and what does my team need to achieve? The second one was who is going to help us get there? And who do I need to invest in to help us get there? And the key role models. And then the third thing for me was always what can I make visible so that people feel more accountable and they feel more pride in making it happen. So you think about this now, we need to get above the who level. And where context really resides is higher up. Okay. But the thing is, we want to empower our people to deliver the what and the how more on their own. And that's absolutely key. Okay. That's the third thing to remember. Now, above the who are the two upper levels, which is where and why. And if you add in another W, which really has to be with every context we frame, you have to add in the when, right? What's really important is, you never get a sense of urgency unless you have a when. And you're always going to have to give people less time and everything because people need to focus and drive more on getting things done quicker. And think about this. You only get creative based on having two things: a very clear target, the context of what you have to achieve, and some type of constraint, right? Because if you have a clear target and no constraints, there's no need to be created to deliver it. And one of the biggest ways to create a constraint is give people less time. A lot of times you think it's, you're just putting pressure on them, but, it's not just pressure. You're forcing them to think of new ways to go make it happen in that way. So if you think about this, context is really why and where with a when behind it, and you're always framing these things for your people. Now, what does it mean? Is it when you give people a context, it's basically helping them make better choices every day. Choices on a number of things, choices on what they decide is important and what they focus on. Choices meaning the decisions they make according to the business and so forth, or choices about where they apply their time, not just on what their focus is, but who are they going to do in the conversations they're driving. I don't know about you, but for the most part in my life, things move forward when I had a conversation, the right conversation with people. Either they're moving forward faster on it, I'm getting clearer, or whatever. And if we frame the context in the right way, people make better choices about how they apply the time. And that's the ultimate thing in today's world is we have to make much more use of our time. But now this is key in terms of who and above. In other words, we as leaders have to be much better at framing a more powerful context, a why and a where with that when. But also, we need to be coaching and growing our who below us to be able to frame the context too and take that down to levels below as well. So we need context providers at every level of the organization. We need people able to frame a more powerful why and where. And here's the thing. If I'm not very good at explaining the why and the where, I'm not a very good communicator, I'm going to have to be involved much, much more in the team to get things done. And so I'm dropping down more into the what and the how all the time versus staying up higher. And I think where we need to get to as leaders is we have to get away from that bottom level how. If we're always into the how, there's just no time and focus to provide that context on the where and the why. And there's another reason why context is so important these days. The companies used to, in the past, companies used to do everything themselves. These days, they're often outsourcing various things to others. They're getting partners, they're collaborating. You can't be successful today unless you're collaborating with others. So we need to be able to frame a context that drives an effective collaboration or the way we integrate things. I don't know about you, but as I climbed in leadership in my career, I thought my job is less about solving problems or giving answers. My job is more about alignment and removing obstacles. Think about this. If you frame a more powerful context that people can embrace and understand, you just naturally provide them a way that they can align more on themselves without always running to you. Okay. So what I really think is, a leader is more why and where. In other words, you can look at it this way. They're showing the future to their people in ways that their people can embrace it. And I think that's really, really key. Okay. So a couple things I just wanted to finish, and then I'll open it up for comments, questions. The one thing you always need to think about here is if you don't have a who, the who is always you. Now, if you don't have a who that understands the context well and your expectations, you're going to be involved a lot more all the time. So if you think about this and you think about what I've been sharing here, we have to be thinking of our role more in terms of context and being better at setting expectations. And that's really where our role should be as leaders. And why we should do it is based on the right side in terms of increasing our level of influence within the organization and stepping up and stepping away from micromanagement to more of getting your people to own the future with you, particularly also the what and the outcomes that way, and enabling those who at each level, the key leaders, to be able to explain the context in lower ways down the organization so that everybody can feel that personal connection to it. So basically what I do these days is I enable growing stronger context providers. I have a very powerful half-day interactive session that I do now that kind of combines the accountability and the context and gets people to understand, why they need to change as leaders and the leader they need to be. And then I also provide daily reminders behind it to try and get people to more habits because, unless it becomes a habit, we just don't do it consistently enough.